Welcome Tacticianers to Teamfight Tactics patch 9.23 rundown, where I'll cover all the changes coming to you this Wednesday and give my thoughts on what the meta might look like. First off though, I want to note that all this info comes from Riot Mort himself and is live on the PvE, but things may change before the update hits live servers. Now there is a lot to go over here, but if you're in a hurry, there will be timestamps for each section in the pinned comment below. Now with that being said, we're going to start off with Synergies, the first of which being Glacial. Glacial stun duration is being nerfed slightly from 40% to 35% at 4 units, and from 60 to 50% at 6 units. This is closer to how strong Glacial was in set 1, and I'm glad to see the change since Olaf is already super strong, and Ezreal is going to be more viable with the buffs he receives this patch. Next is Shadow, which is also getting a slight nerf, with its damage being dropped from 50% to 45% at 2 units, so not too bad there, and from 100% to 85% at 4 units. Overall, it's still pretty strong, but not as scary as it was last patch. Next we have Light, which isn't really getting a nerf, but more of a shift in power and may be a bit confusing. So before, when a Light unit died, all other Light units would heal for 25% of their max health, but now they heal for 25% of the health of the unit that's dying. Basically all this does is make the healing weaker if you have a bunch of 1-star units, and stronger as your units level up. Alright, moving on, we have Ocean, which has its mana regeneration increased from 30 to 35 at 4 units, and from 50 to 60 at 6 units. It's not a huge change, but it will be really good late game if you can manage to get a Lux for 6 Oceans, and will likely make Mage and Summoners a bit stronger overall. Lastly, we have Warden, which is having its armor increased from 125% to 150% at 2 units, and from 275 to 300 at 4 units. It's nice to see Wardens getting a buff since they don't really feel like great tanks right now, and since a few of them are getting their own direct buffs this patch, this should make for an even better frontline. Next we have item nerfs, first of which is Ionic Spark, which is having its damage dropped from 100 to 90. The main reason for this being, the devs don't think this item's really fun, and I kind of agree. They also don't like how it directly counters spellcasters like Kindred, Ezreal, and Kog'Maw. Next we have Frozen Heart and Iceborne Gauntlet, which shouldn't really come as a surprise since everybody stacks these when playing on a cloud board. Their attack speed slow is being dropped from 35% to 25%, which is still okay, but not a must-have anymore. Finally, we have the biggest change to items being that you can no longer heal while being revived by GA. This was mainly to get rid of the GA redemption combo, but also applies to Light's passive and healing from support units like Janna. That's it for items. Next up we have champions, starting at the bottom with 1-cost units. First up we have Ivern and Maokai, who are both getting slight nerfs, making them a little easier to deal with in the mid and late game, with Ivern's spell shield going from 200, 400, and 600, down to 200, 350, and 500. And Maokai's healing going from 100, 200, 300 to 100, 175, and 250. They're still great early units, but definitely not worth keeping past the mid game. Next is Nasus, with a buff to his level 1 and a nerf to his level 3, with his damage going from 35, 70, and 105 to 50, 70, and 90, and his healing going from 200, 400, and 600 to 250, 400, and 550. Vayne is getting the same treatment with her spell damage increased from 8% to 9% at level 1 and decreasing from 16 to 15% at level 3. I think this is good since Nasus and Vayne are some of the weaker light units and this will help them early on. Next we have a small buff to Talia with her mana being reduced by 5 and her stun being increased by half a second. Riot said they've done this to give her more of a role as a CC unit instead of just being something you pick up to get 6 mages. Next we have Vlad, whose damage and healing is being nerfed from 200, 350, and 500 to 200, 325, and 450. This is kind of a big change since he won't be able to tank as well as he did last patch, but he still does well as a semi-frontline and will help reach the buffed Ocean Synergies. Moving on to 2 costs, we have Malzahar, whose minions' health is being nerfed from 300 to 250, which will make them a little easier to clear, but shouldn't be too big of a game changer, especially if he has a Shojin's. Next we have Rek'Sai, who's also getting a buff on level 1 and a nerf on level 3, bringing her spell damage from 200, 550, and 900 to 250, 550, and 850, While I'm happy to see her getting more damage early on, the reduction to her level 3 doesn't feel like it's going to be that big of a difference, so she'll still be one of the strongest predators. While we're on predators, let's talk about Skarner. He's one of the weaker ones, but he's getting buffed by having his mana cost lowered from 75 to 65. Now this isn't going to make him super strong, but it should let him proc his shield more often, making him a better tank. Next up is Thresh, who I think is going to be a pretty good unit this patch since both his synergies and his spell shield are getting buffed. His shield is getting buffed at all levels, going from 200, 300, 400 to 250, 400, and 600. Next up is Yasuo, who's having the number of hits on his ult changed from 3, 5, and 7 to 4, 5, and 6. This was mainly due to the damage of his ult technically scaling from the number of hits, as well as the increased damage he gets from leveling. Overall, this should make him better in the early game and more balanced at 3 stars. Moving on to the only 3 cost unit, we have Ezreal. Ezreal's mana is going down from 40 to 30, and the animation time for his spell cast is being cut in half, making it less likely to miss. This should make him a more reliable caster for Ranger comps, and will likely see more play this patch. Next is 4 cost units, starting with Ashe, who's getting a small buff to her attack speed going from 0.7 to 0.8. This, along with some bug fixes we'll talk about later, and the improvement of other crystals, should make her a more viable champion. Next we have Brand, who's getting a buff at level 1 with his damage going from 250 to 300 and getting an extra bounce. He's also getting a nerf at level 3 with his damage dropping from 650 to 600, but overall this should make him better if you're struggling to get him to level 2, and as far as level 3 goes, his ult still bounces 20 times, so in most cases, the damage change won't really make any difference. Next we have Malphite, who's getting a buff to his HP, taking it from 800 to 850. Now while Malphite's ult is already really good, he didn't feel very tanky, so this along with the buffs to Warden should make him last a little longer as the front line. Next up is one I think everyone saw coming, a nerf to Olaf, but not in the way you may think. His mana cost is going up from 75 to 90. This may not seem like a big enough nerf with how strong he's been, but the higher mana cost will give you a bigger window to shut him down before he starts wreaking havoc. Next is Yorick, whose schools are getting one of the bigger nerfs this patch, with their health going from 750, 1250, and 1750 to 600, 1000, and 1400, and their attack speed dropping from 0.8 to 0.7. Honestly, I'm glad to see this nerf considering a 2-star Yorick could drop minions that were stronger than a lot of champions, and since they count as light, they give the heal and attack speed buff on death. Finally, we have the 5 cost units, starting with everybody's favorite carry, Singed. Singed is getting a nerf to his health, bringing him from 1050 to 950, which is a good amount, but he'll still have the most health in the game. His level 1 and 2 damage is also getting nerfed though, bringing him from 250, 500, and 2000 to 200, 400, and 2000. He's still going to be a late game carry since he is a 5 cost after all, but these changes should give the other teams more of a fighting chance. And last but not least, we have Taric, who's getting his health buffed from 850 to 900. This, along with other Crystal and Warden buffs, could make him a great frontline for Rangers once you have Ashe on your team. Now that's it for ultimate changes, but Riot also wanted to make mid-game 3-star units feel more rewarding and worth rolling for. So, a lot of 2 and 3 cost units are getting buffs to their level 3 damage ratios. Going down the list, Neeko and Thresh are getting plus 50 damage, Syndra's getting plus 75 damage, Jax and LeBlanc are getting plus 100 damage, Volibear is getting plus 150 damage, Nautilus is getting plus 100 damage and a second longer on his stun, Kindred is getting plus 150 damage, Ezreal and Sion are getting plus 200 damage, and Aatrox is getting a whopping plus 250 damage. That's everything you need to know for champions. Now let's move on to bug fixes, which there's a good amount of, so I'm going to do this rapid fire. Pathing has been improved, fixing AFK units. Druid bug is fixed, so no more free Druid buff. All summons are now 0-star. All PvE monsters are now 1-star. All dragons and heralds are now 3-star. Making a ranged unit a Berserker has its cone location fixed. Renekton's empowered attack now scales with AP. Vlad's tooltip correctly shows how much he'll heal for. Zyra's plant's attack speed is now 1. Zyra's plants can't be benched. Voidling's attack speed has been fixed, but is not a noticeable change. Volibear now restores mana on one-shots. Azir's soldiers no longer spawn on Zyra plants. Mundo and Kiana won't cast if enemies aren't in range. Vygar's tooltip now reads instantly kills lower units instead of dealing massive damage. Annie's mana won't regen until all Tibbers have died. Ash's level 3 scaling is fixed for this patch. Ash can now proc Blade Master while using her ability. Olaf and Singed will no longer appear frozen. Singed Poison will now stack with other Singed units. Zed clones now show damage in Zed's damage tracker, and the biggest one being Diana's orbs no longer hit for AoE. This is a big nerf to her and will probably drop her from an S tier to a C tier. Alright, now for items. Dragonclaw now reduces damage from non-spells. Iceborne Gauntlet Slow will no longer stay after round ends. Inferno now works on champions with empowered attacks and autos buffed from Nami's wave. Spatula items no longer double non-spatula stats, and Talisman now correctly gives magic resist. That's it for changes. Now if you'd ask me what I think is going to be good this patch, I'd say Mage is going to be pretty strong, since Brand is slightly stronger at level 1, and Vygar also has an advantage over summons now because of the changes to their star level. Also, since Thresh is stronger, using him and Nautilus to get 4 Oceans is going to be really good. I also think that with the buffs to Ashe and Ezreal, we might see Rangers pop up a bit more, probably with a Taric in the late game since him and Ashe will proc Crystal together. I don't think Summoners will be as strong this patch since Yorick and Malzahar got their own nerfs, and Annie is indirectly nerfed with the Vygar countering Tibbers. As far as Shadow and Predator go, I think they're in a pretty healthy spot right now, so still viable, but not too strong. I also think that Glacial is in a pretty good spot, especially since, now that Ezreal is more viable, you don't need to rely on Olaf to do all the work. And lastly, I think we might see more Assassin comps since they haven't changed too much and are direct counters to Rangers and Mages. We might also see more Desert being used since Warden got buffed and they're probably going to be a little bit more popular this patch. But anyways, those are my thoughts on the patch. I'd love to hear yours in the comments, and if you found this helpful, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to stay up to date on all things TFT. Good luck, Tacticianers, and I'll see you next time.